Yeah, hello and welcome everybody to In the Hot Seat. For our repeat viewers, welcome back. For everybody else, welcome. So we are every 2 weeks, we are live and we put industry experts and our customers into the hot seat for a lively discussion, debate, and maybe even some discourse as we humanize the customer experience and the digital experience. That covers all aspects of the customer lifecycle. They're up to discussion, basically, as well as technology used throughout each phase of the journey. Today, we are digging into legacy application modernization, which is a big part of employee and customer experience, and of course, as part of this big world digital transformation. The challenge with it is it's failing more often than not. There was recently a report by Boston Consulting Group that says over 2/3 of the transformations are failing. They're falling short of expectations because time, budgets, ambitions are too high, budgets too short, time too short. So what do you think, Pete, can be the reasons for that, and how can we cover that?
Well, when I started to do some research in this area, I looked at a Forbes article, some research done by IBM, and everything that they mentioned to me came across as sort of non-technical. They were all more of humans interacting with other humans, is one aspect of it. So, do we have clarity on the vision? Do we have clarity on the problem it is we are trying to solve? And the thing that I've seen in the past is it's sort of like this function where the number of stakeholders go up, and so does the complexity, and so does the chance for failure. And so I think it really has a lot to do with two things. One is just the sort of the complexity of the human relationships and the communication between them. And the second thing is for me the data. So in this space, I really think that there's what I call a lot of analog data that are required for transformational decisions. So in my mind, analog data is sort of that embedded intelligence that's in all of the stakeholders' minds, as opposed to, we'll just go grab some data from systems and pull that in. I think the more analog data that is part of this thing, this decision, this initiative, this transformation, the greater the challenge in sort of everybody understanding one another. So I think it's kind of that's maybe two sides of the same coin there.
Yeah, I think it's probably also different points of view into the same topic. So if you have an enterprise architect or a CIO or a CEO, they are all coming from different angles and will probably lose their communication ways in between. So, but hey, we are kind of messengers here and we are speculating. So why not ask an expert? Coincidentally, we have one. Today we are talking with Brian Sommer. He is an award-winning IT industry analyst and who is covering exactly this with ERP, finance, and HR sectors. He is a contributor to Diginomica and other publications on application software relating matters. So that's a perfect fit, right? He also advises global clients on software selections, transformation projects, and other complex initiatives. Brian has written 4 books, meanwhile. His latest book is on ESG, but prior books covered software selections, software contract negotiations, and transformational projects, of which application modernization is one. Previously, he was a senior partner at Accenture with leadership roles in their software intelligence, human capital, and finance performance management groups. So he has led global finance, ERP, and HR I'm talking faster than my tongue can move. He has shared services for major global firms and was quality assurance partner in other projects too. So let's welcome Brian before we get totally over the top in just introducing you. So,
well, you asked me to give you some intro stuff. I didn't think you would use it all. So anyway, but thank you for that.
well,
And,
I could have used even more, because I mean we know each other, met once in a while, and
yeah,
there's lots to be said.
So, well, I always appreciate some kind of whatever overly familiar kind of introduction. So thank you for that, Tom.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us.
So what do you want to cover today?
Why is it so freaking hard to do a modernization project of application landscapes?
Okay.
The umbrella question.
I could probably launch on that for about 20 minutes and not even come up for breath. One of the real problems, frankly, is clients pay me to actually help them make a fundamental shift, a major change, a step change, an improvement. They're not looking for someone. It's not modernization if you're going to end up with the same thing you had before with some tiny little bit of improvement. That's not moving the needle. And and the tough part about doing something that's bold is you've got a lot of people who want to protect the status quo. And so you find folks who I find are often very nostalgic. They liked, the way they've always done things. They'll fight you throughout the entire project, and they'll want you to do stuff just the way it used to be done, just with a little bit newer, maybe underlying technology, but no real change. In this world, things move ever faster, and we can't have companies that just want to move at the same plodding pace. If you're going to make something transformational, then you're going to have to do something that's bold and big and uncomfortable.
Audacious.
And just because it feels just like you used to do things doesn't mean it's going to be transformative. I think. Anyway,
maybe I briefly interrupt. There's an interesting question in the comment section here. So, can it be that part of the problem is that there's no real definition of legacy modernization or of application modernization? What would be your definition of it?
Well, there is a problem with some projects where there is a tremendous lack of insight, innovation, almost like daring. I mean, you've got to be able to push the envelope here and move forward. Incremental change is going to deliver very unspectacular kinds of results, and they may not be relevant for any real period of time at all. It's tough to actually put your job, your career, whatever on the line to make something big and transformational actually happen. And that scares a lot of people. But I can walk into a client in 10, 15 minutes. I can figure out, like, oh my goodness, they've got tons of broken integrations that they never bothered to fix. They've got really old technology. They're way behind in technical debt, and I could go on and on. Those kind of companies first need almost a janitorial service to get them out of that mess and get them to at least be process excellent, if you will. And then maybe later on, they can, once they get the patient stabilized, they can think about doing something that's even more ambitious, where it's going to create competitive advantage, not just competitive parity. And that competitive parity is where a lot of companies fall into, because it's easy, it's convenient. They know exactly what their competition's doing or what other companies their size do. They use the same old technology everybody else does. They're not going to be any different than anyone else, and they're not going to deliver any kind of great returns for the shareholders. And that's, I think, a mistake.
And that feels safer to them, I imagine. Being able to look at peers and say, well, we're not doing anything that our competition isn't doing, and so we didn't make a bad decision.
You know what? For everyone who thinks that, they really need to pick up an old book that Jim Collins wrote called From Good to Great. And and you got to actually take the time to figure out what it is you want your company to be. And you can't
Mhm.
just be a little bit about a lot of things. You've got to get really focused about where you really want to take the company going forward. So you're right
Mm.
on the money on that, Pete. And you know, again, the toughest thing I've run into with clients is trying to move some of the people who want to fight change and get them out of the way, get them out of the from interfering with the real change that's required. Another one is to get management to quit funding a whole bunch of little initiatives that added together still won't make any big difference. It's get the
Mm.
focus on something that's got a long life out there in the marketplace. And that's where you really you really earn your pay, but it's also where you really transform a company.
Funding is a very interesting word in that context. Well, in order to modernize your IT landscape, your application landscape, you do not essentially or necessarily add capabilities that you have or do something much better. You're essentially doing the same. So how to build a business case based upon that? Because it's also lasting quite a time to go through a modernization project.
I'll use a real example. A client of mine about 2 years ago had grown through acquisitions. In fact, they made about 60 different major acquisitions in about 30 odd years. Okay, so they were doing one or two big ones every year. And as a result, they ended up with 60 different kinds of manufacturing plants, 60 different ways of making products. They had no consistent way of knowing what it costs to make a ton of
Mhm.
final output product anywhere around the world. And I
Mhm.
go on and on. What they did is they started off kind of as a placeholder in trying to make each plant individually operationally efficient. But when you put it all together, it was a mess. And it was so bad that they had a big consulting firm had come in and had figured out a new metric just for that client, and it was ERPs per employee. That's how many different ERP systems they had. You're laughing. That was my real client. Okay, that really is that was the reality of what was going on. To bring it
Mhm.
all together, there was a whole bunch of stuff you had to rationalize and figure out why are we shipping products halfway across the world when we have a more efficient way of doing it
Mhm.
by rationalizing the correct supply chain and everything else. I mean, that's just one tiny example, but it really takes both vision but more importantly, it takes a lot of political capital to make a fundamental shift in how you really want the company to operate.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people running these transformation projects, they're either too far down in the org chart or they just never had the political capital to speak of. And these
Mhm.
things don't come off. I do a lot of work in HR, interestingly enough, and I routinely run into HR people who are some of the, not their fault, but they are probably the least respected executives at the executive committee level. The money, the projects, the transformation stuff usually will go to like operations leaders, to supply
Mhm.
chain leaders, and others, finance, and HR will get almost nothing. It's like a bad Dickens novel. It's somebody, please, sir, may I have some budget?
Mhm.
And that's tough. It's not a fair place. It's not a fair world out there. And trying to get that kind of change through is going to require someone who's got incredible amounts of political capital. And if you're an executive watching this and you're thinking, oh, I don't have it either. Well, just know this, like there's another reason why clients hire an outsider like yours truly. They expect me to burn up almost all of my political capital within the client so that
Mhm.
by the time we get near the end of the project, the client that hired me now still has all their political capital intact and they're going to get to take the bows and the credit for it. And I'm okay with that. I mean, it's a good living for me, but it also delivers a good benefit for the client.
Yeah, that's part of the role of the consultant, right? To make someone else shine. That's
At this point in my career, I'm happy with that. That's
yeah,
good. Yeah, that's fine.
yeah. There is another interesting question by our dear friend Christy. So she asked whether legacy modernization needs to be a big bang, or can this done in bits and pieces? I love the bits and pieces part of it.
Okay, so I just got the interesting. I just got the comments to show up on my screen here. So bear with me, Christy. Sorry about that. Legacy modernization. Yeah. Depending on the client I talk to, well, some think it's we're going to put in a new. We're going to keep the same software. We're just going to upgrade the technology stack. Or some say we're going to keep the old software. We're going to now run it on a new, maybe on a third-party hyperscaler data center. Some are, well, we'll skip a couple of generations and finally get this stuff, functionally current, and maybe get rid of some of the technical debt with the old product. All of those are, I kind of view that as housekeeping. That's not, that's like, it's like going around the house with a fresh dust, cloth and tidying up all the, the strange old bits and pieces that have been laying around. But that to me isn't transformation. If that's all it is, what you're really trying to do is get a different set of business outcomes. And we all know that old quote attributed to Albert Einstein, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And, if you're doing those kind of projects, yeah, it's not going to deliver much. It's going to be the same old stuff with a terrible business case behind it. It will be more modern, but it won't be doing much else.
Brian, who defines those business outcomes? Like whose job is it to do that? Clearly not an architect or the head of HR. I mean,
well, at the beginning of the effort, there's going to be a lot of discussion, discovery work, and eventually even some horse trading. One of the more interesting things I'll do with some headstrong, unfocused clients, I'll put their executive team on a plane and I'll fly them to the home office of 2 or 3 software companies. And we're going to go spend an afternoon or whatever with each one of them and to make sure that everyone now sees what the art of the possible really is. Because without that kind of imagination, the project just becomes some upgrade effort, and that's all it's ever going to be. So we've got, there's clearly an education challenge and a change management challenge that has to take place. I don't like to tell clients what the answer is. I'm going to make them talk to all these other executives or peer companies and other industries, whatever, and all of a sudden light bulbs start popping off, and now they're ready to move forward on it. Then the question is not one of, can we get the funding? The funding is going to be there. Now the question is, how quickly can we move? How quickly can we pivot, things in this organization to make it a reality? I'm fascinated that these modernization efforts, they're not about the technology per se. That's like a secondary or tertiary kind of concern. The first is, can we get the company leaders to all agree on where they really want to move and take the company? And if you can't do that, the project's never going to deliver the value you want. But it's getting them out of their comfort zone, getting them out of their usual offices, and get them to go play in a different kind of traffic where they actually see what the art of the possible is. That's where the magic happens.
So you would say that an application modernization project is essentially a business transformation project?
If you do it right, yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay, this, of course, it was a yes/no question, so a closed question. So.
Well, if all you do is just upgrade from I don't know, Linux to some other kind of operating system, that's not changing anything. It's spending a lot of money with a doubtful kind of outcome, and frankly, it's just not a great use of the client's capital. So let's get the maximum bang for the buck out of it. But the biggest challenge is getting the people to see what that art of the possible is, and then get them all focused on delivering on that. One other thing I would point out, Thomas, is the depth of vision on where these leaders are going to take their projects sometimes can be incredibly short. I mean, they're thinking in terms of like a year or two, because for some of them, they're not worried about trying to solve problems that might be 5, 8, 10 years out in the history of the company, because maybe they're controlled by a private equity firm and they're worried that they might lose their jobs. So they're beholden to what does Wall Street want or need out of it. So it's kind of hard to do something massively transformational when a activist shareholder or PE firm is going to really constrain how they can hang on to their money.
Okay.
And there's one other thing, which are some execs are bound by decision rights, and I'll run into that at some companies where certain executives who run like a given line of business, they're the ones who have control over all the capital and the IT stuff in their LOB, and they may or may not want to play ball with someone in another line of business, and you can get into some really great arguments about that. I've never had much luck helping clients trying to cross the streams, if you will, with 2 or more LOBs. There's a Ghostbuster reference for you there.
Yeah.
I'm glad you caught that, Pete. But when you're trying to help, when one line of business has this great idea and a great technology upgrade opportunity, and they'd like to share that with others, but now all of a sudden politics rear their ugly head, and you can't get the cooperation to to cross from one BU to the next.
Bringing that to a concrete example, Christy again asked, so a move to microservices, will that deliver a noticeable client outcome?
Okay, so microservices are hot and are going to keep staying hot, particularly as we're using more and more AI kind of capabilities as a microservice capability. So it's going to be there. I don't know that it's the lead for the story, but I think it's one of the great enablers that might be out there to drive some of the great benefits. As far as is it going to be? It could have some big bang capabilities, but again, I think you need to look at it as more of an enabler of change. But the big change still has to be directionally where we're going to go as a company. How do we want to interact with customers and other third parties, maybe? And that, I think, is the real opportunity on some of these modernization deals. Is we've solved a lot of the efficiency concerns. Now we need to start thinking about how can we use data that goes across the entirety of the value chain or the supply chain? How do we deal with other constituents like subcontractors that are 3 levels down in the in the ecosystem, and where do we put all this down, and how do we use it and everything else? Those are the kinds of questions we ought to be talking about. It's not just about the immediate transactions that impact a company within the 4 walls of the enterprise. It's a much bigger thing than that today.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially in the sense of what would be transformational. It just makes sense that you would expand the scope to something that's significantly larger, like including this supply chain members, to rethink how, I double underline the word upgrade you used a minute ago. We're not talking about upgrades here. We're talking about rethinking the business outcome, and then what technology needs to follow to enable you to do that.
Well said. I don't think you're going to get gigantic benefits just by tweaking the process efficiencies within the 4 walls of the enterprise. You'll get some benefit, and some new insights, but that's going to become table stakes. That's not really where the real value is all about. Probably one of the more interesting things is not trying to take us down a completely different rat hole. But when you look at what are the data requirements, for example, that ESG can drive, where you're trying to find out where in the supply chain do we have is our company using like forced labor, or where do we have certain kinds of emission challenges that are really problematic because the data either doesn't exist, it's over averaged, over aggregated, over annualized, whatever. And we don't have those answers. We don't even have a place in a lot of systems to even put this information. So if you really want to talk about transformative kind of things, then let's talk about real transformation here, where we rethink what is the information we need, how do we make it more current, how do we make it more real time. There's a movie that we've all seen before, where transaction processing used to be dealing with month-old data that got processed in batch, and then it got to become real-time updated, then it got to become in the cloud and so forth. And now where we're at is we're going to cross that same set of issues with all this ESG information, where we want to know it across every player in the supply chain, the value chain. And right now it's barely batched. There's no place to put it. It's old information. It's not very accurate. And already companies are chomping at the bit to let's make it at least real time. And then in the future, we'll want to use it to predict and forecast things. So we have huge opportunities for some really transformational stuff. But the vision, if you will, has to be beyond just basic transaction processing within the four walls of the company. And let's take it even further. Just one other example. Where are we falling down? Where are companies falling down on this vision for the modernization? And let's just look at what is AI doing to HR? Because we're not thinking about how other people like job seekers are using these low-cost AI tools. I mean, like low to zero-cost AI tools to spam the living daylights out of employers and application tracking systems. We got one guy that applied to 5,000 jobs in 1 week. Think about that. Think about
of a programmer.
Well, and what we have is we have resume spam. We have ATSs being gamed to death because people are all perfecting their resumes, so they all read the same, sound the same, and no one knows who the real authentic candidates are. So we have a whole new crop of business problems that didn't exist a couple of years ago, all thanks to the transformative power behind generative AI. And what are we going to do about it? So we have these new problems. Now we need new countermeasures. We need new solutions.
I have this is really a rabbit hole. So that I have a particular. I would say that the applicants are doing self-defense here, so which is really a detour. But back to application modernization and business transformation. What you basically said is you need a vision and you need to have the execs in a row lined up, basically to share this vision and to pursue this vision. What are the key success factors to avoid failures do you see as well?
Let me just tack on to that, Thomas, because I was just about to say the same thing. So I've got three takeaways so far. The first was sort of clarity of vision. The second one was sort of alignment of herding the cats. Everybody's got different incentives and constraints and the culture that has to do with how well do we play with each other in the sandbox. And then the third one that Brian just brought up was sort of the whole idea of data requirements and the quality of the data that exists to make this decision or do this initiative or transformation, the sparseness of the data, all of those things where you think, well, we'll just be a data-driven enterprise now. Well, what if that data isn't data yet? Maybe it's just embedded expertise, or some, it isn't being collected or stored, or there's no place for it, or it seems like sometimes with technology sort of is the tail wagging the dog. Oh, we can do this, kind of like your generative AI example a minute ago. So we'll all gravitate toward that, and now we're all the same, but we're same in a new way, but that there's no advantage there. There's no step function, as you said earlier, improvement. Now we're all just doing this. So that'll just reiterate what Thomas was saying. Is there another sort of major dimension of this that we haven't talked about yet that makes this transformation thing so difficult?
So yes, there is another dimension that we really need to look at, and it's not Twilight Zone kind of stuff here, but
or is it?
It has to be
there is a place beyond the space and time, a space known only as the Twilight Zone.
The transformation.
Okay, so we could. I definitely want to come back to some of the critical pitfalls on these transformations, but I want to finish up this one crisp set of thoughts around what are we transforming right now. When I have a great slide that shows what the process workflow around recruiting used to look like 20 years ago, and then I have another picture of what that process looked like about 10 years ago. And what was interesting is lots of recruiters had no awareness of all of these consumer grade tools that job seekers were able to take advantage of. And and just one example is, before, this is campus interviewing, before a student is willing to sign up for any kind of campus interviewing, they go to a site called, either like Social Intelligence, or I may be mixing up the names here, but it goes and scrubs the internet to make sure that these people have no nasty tidbits about their private lives hanging out on the internet before they start interviewing for a job. And I could go on and on. They also consult with their tribe, their people, other fellow students to find out, do we students like this employer or not? Would I even want to waste my time on? There's a whole ecosystem of thousands, tens of thousands of these third-party applications that just college students can pick and choose and take advantage of. And most corporate employers have no visibility or idea of what else is out there. That was 10 years ago. Now with the AI tools, that just compounds the deal even further. So if you're going to be doing transformation stuff, you've got to get off your butt, get out there and play in traffic, and you've got to see what the totality of technologies are and look at processes and workflows from different dimensions other than your own selfish internal view only, because it's the way others are going to use this stuff is really going to show whether you're going to get any kind of competitive advantage or not out of this stuff. You know, so it's you got to think more broadly and more holistically, so that you build something with some measure of permanence and capability for your company. Anyway,
what you were just talking about, Brian, struck me as the speed and the number of feedback loops that are sort of commonplace now versus 10 or 20 years ago is astronomically different. The kids that are 20 to 30 years old, kids, they are in constant feedback loops all day long, with their phone going off every 20 seconds with some other feedback on anything. And my generation, at least, it was way more autonomous. I mean, there just wasn't the connectivity. So you just get in the habit of what do I need to do to make this happen, even though it might even be somebody else's job. I just can't wait for them to do it. And it's just the opposite now. It's just swung completely in the opposite direction in terms of communication between people and feedback loops.
It's very different. You're right. You're right on the money on that. And there is a generational concern in there as well. The speed with what we also have is we have a speed of obsolescence around processes, process workflows, and the individual technologies. And everyone, I think, has to be aware that if we're going to do one of these transformative kind of projects, we have to realize that the useful life of that transformation is just shrinking and shrinking, because new things will come out that will render whatever it is you did obsolete ever quicker. So the idea, I remember having a conversation with a CIO, of a giant intergalactic sized big software customer. He was on stage talking about how he never will forget when he had to go ask the board of directors for $1 billion, 1 billion with a B, to upgrade to a consistent global ERP solution. And it took him about 12 years to get it done. And then he says, I don't think I'm ever going to ask for that kind of budget again. Even if we need it, I just don't have that kind of political capital to make that happen. So we've got some real tender dynamics we got to worry with here. There is a There is the need to make big, bold change, and we need to
Mhm.
make it have some staying power. But on the other hand, there's so much innovation occurring all around the margins, all within other players and people and constituents out there. It's going to make it ever harder to do that and get the sustainable value you like.
Yeah, that's funny. I've got this paper sitting in front of me with this quote on it that I didn't know if it would come up or not, but I think it just did. And that quote was, in an organization that recognizes the need to take a continuous approach to transformation, the leader's job isn't to design a change program, but to build a change platform. The idea is we're always in transformation, and
Mhm.
we are, if this project is going to take us 5 years to implement, and it's only we need it for the next 4 years, you're always going to be falling off the treadmill.
So I'll match you quote to quote, Pete. My old boss at Accenture, George Shaheen, he used to beat the partners up on this one point all the time to rally us around the right direction. And he used to just say the simple thing that we have to have the courage to change in spite of our past success. And I always thought that was a
Mhm.
brilliant comment. And it serves as a warning to anybody who thinks now that your company has maybe closed off and finished one project or change initiative,
Mhm.
that now they get to sit back and coast for a few years. No, that isn't going to happen. You're going to be living through change very frequently because
Mhm.
you can't control the change going on out there in the world and all the innovation. You're going to have to figure out how do we rise above that and stay ahead of the pack. That's really our goal.
So what you are basically saying is that one of the key pitfalls that you can run into is being good and successful.
Well, there's a ton of those pitfalls. How about this? I'll just tell you real quick, Thomas. Here's some real life problems that have nailed some projects I was working on. And the first one was I had one project, we went through three project sponsors in less than a year. And it's really hard to maintain
Mm.
momentum
Yeah.
and everything else when you have that kind of change. We had
What
another one.
happened to the first two? Sorry for interrupt, but
Oh, well, I wouldn't say the first two were practice ones, but
Mm.
no, they got it. They got it. In all fairness, they were all
Mm.
committed and everything else.
Mm.
I had another one where the client sold off 40% of its business in the middle of the night one night when
Mm.
we were about halfway through with the project. And that just destroyed the economics of the project
Mm.
because that 40% now was just no longer there. It was out of scope. Had another one where the company faced an existential crisis driven by, of all things, an amazing political scandal kind of thing that popped up, and that kind of stopped the project. On the other hand, I've had lots of fantastic successes, and what's always cool to me is to see how the team morphs and changes through the life of that to become people who are super powerfully energized about being on the cutting edge of everything. And that's because and I think listeners ought to pay attention to this because if you pull people off their regular jobs to
Mm.
work on one of these transformation efforts, whether it's for a few months or a couple of years, at the end of it all, these people now have mad, new, crazy skills, but they also have kind of a bloodlust. They know how to do these big, powerful change initiatives, and they want to do another one and
Yeah.
another one
Yeah.
after that. And you got to have roles for these people on what are
Mm.
they going to do once we get to
Mm.
the end of this kind of initiative. Those are
Okay.
just some examples.
Well, part of let me turn your words in your mouth, being a little unfair here. So what you are basically saying is that the biggest enemy of a change project is instability.
Mm.
And on the other hand, we have seen it's a constant change that is required. So how to align these two seemingly different views?
Well, what I've learned, Thomas, is always try and, if where possible, have some kind of break points in the project where you
Mm.
can capture some of the benefits and maybe readjust the flow, the initiative, and everything, and don't paint it that we're absolutely doing everything under the sun and we're absolutely going to get it all delivered, at the end of this due date, which is coming at some point. That's generally not going to work. There are three kinds. This is something people might want to remember. There are three kinds of project or leaders, if you will, on this world. Some are like judges. They sit there back and they collect all kinds of data and elements about the transformation, and they'll think on it for weeks or months and ponder on all the possibilities. They take forever to make a decision, and they are worthless in these kind of roles. Another kind of person is a bureaucrat. You don't want them running the transformation either, because a bureaucrat has to follow things like by the book. They've got it all. They've got work plans and methodologies and everything else. And they're like, no, we have to follow the procedure, the book and everything else. But that's not the reality of the real world. Things change, people change, initiatives change, competition changes, technology changes, whatever. That won't work. And the third kind of person is a field commander in the military. And a field commander has a great battle plan to begin with. But once the first bullet's fired off, then everything starts changing and morphing. And you need somebody who's running this transformation effort that can react in real time, change their mind, make some, new decisions about the allocation of talent and resources, whatever, and keep focused on achieving the end goal that you're looking for. So the great transformation has to have someone who's got that military field commander kind of way of management and isn't so beholden to their old ideas that they can't be flexible and keep changing and changing and changing to fit the ever evolving circumstances. Sounds obvious, but trust me, you can't have rigidity in these kind of efforts in this day and age.
Which brings us to kind of an umbrella again. So now we have covered a good deal of success factors and pitfalls as well. But one of the topics that we didn't really get into is when to engage in a modernization project. So there are surely some times where you the hell shouldn't, and other ones where you better really don't postpone it any longer.
So with apps modernization, for the app side, when do you do it? Okay, you're going to run into 3 or 4 kinds of companies out there, your listeners. There are some that are operating at a highly dysfunctional level, and there are companies in danger of possibly going under any day now. For them, it's not so much a transformation as they need to make enough of the right changes that get them up to a functioning state once again. And it's not going to be pretty. They're going to, when you peek behind the curtains and see what they have, it's like watching legislation or sausage being made, and it's not a pretty sight. You got others that are functioning who need to become process excellent before they start thinking of even bigger transformation stuff. And believe it or not, that's probably 70% of businesses out there. They're functioning. They're just not hitting, in baseball parlance, they're getting some on base and some or base hits and some singles and doubles, but they're not hitting home runs. And then you finally have the much smaller number of companies, a few percent, that are process excellent who want to transform the rules of competition in their industry. And you could be dysfunctional and you might want to be transformational, but until you get all this other stuff cleaned up, straightened out, and become an efficient entity once again, you're not going to achieve it. If I learned anything from college psychology, Psych 301, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he talked about how you go from if you're starving and have no food, clothing, and shelter, those are your physiological needs. You don't care about something at the top of the pyramid like physiological, about self-actualization. You don't care about that. You're starving. You're worried about, where do I eat tonight? And we have companies at each one of those stages, and the really fascinating transformation efforts are the ones where the company is pretty close to being process excellent, wants to go to that next step up. It's a big step, and it's not for everybody right now.
Well, I think that's all the time we have, Brian. Thank you. So you've great news. You've survived the hot seat. If you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. This is your In the Hot Seat episode for today. Thanks so much for being with us. And tune in 2 weeks for different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put somebody else into the hot seat. Thanks again, Brian.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Thomas. Good luck on your next episode. Take care.
Thank you.